Hello everyone, and welcome to the presentation on urban trees and stormwater management. I'm so pleased to be a part of the 9th Annual Governor's Conference on the Future of Water here in Kansas. And while it may look differently from the years past, I'm glad we are still able to gather together to share information and resources on the management of water here in Kansas. Well, even though I can't see any of you in person at the moment, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Andrew Larson, and I am an urban forester and ISA certified arborist that works for JEO Consulting Group. My home base is Ankeny, Iowa, and my specialties are urban forest health and management. JEO Consulting Group is a private consulting firm that's been serving its clients from Wahoo, Nebraska since 1937. Our services include engineering, architecture, surveying, planning, and environmental sciences. I am a team member of the Environmental Sciences Department, where we also have wetland scientists, restoration ecologists, and other urban foresters. I actually lead our urban forestry efforts, where we serve clients giving comprehensive tree inventories, urban forest management plans, and hazard tree analysis surveys. We have office locations throughout the Midwest, specifically in Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas. Now that we have introductions out of the way, I wanted to give a little overview of the topics that I'll be discussing throughout this presentation. First, I'll touch on how urbanization and the lack of pre-development-like conditions affect stormwater management in our cities today. Next, we'll explore the need for trees in our communities and the roles they play in interception, infiltration, and transpiration of stormwater. And lastly, we'll investigate the impact that street trees have on our community's infrastructure. Something I've always believed since the beginning of my career is that if you want to create solutions to problems, you need to first thoroughly understand the problems that you're trying to solve. So through this section of the presentation, we'll be discussing how urbanization and the lack of pre-development conditions affect stormwater management negatively. With that being said, let's talk about the issues at hand. The first issue is large isolated rain events. So these large isolated rain events have become increasingly common throughout the Midwest and inundate cities with large amounts of stormwater in short periods of time. I'm sure you've all been caught in one time or another. Stormwater drainage systems have evolved to better handle large rain events, but this can cause serious problems with erosion and flooding issues when they're inundated all at once, especially if hitting during the wrong time of year when there's a lot of debris, say, on the road or in the ditches. Another big issue is compacted soils in urban areas. Unfortunately, a majority of urban soils are highly compacted and don't allow water to properly seep into the ground like they would in a natural rate, and instead this stormwater runs over the ground. This occurrence, called surface runoff, often causes erosion and the increased speed of water across the land. And last but not least, there are more impervious surfaces and less plant cover. So all of this stormwater that I've been discussing is falling unmitigated onto impervious surfaces and being channeled into stormwater management systems. Another way we can go about solving these problems is by taking a look back at history. By looking at pre-development conditions and comparing them to post-development conditions that we see now, we can better understand how to fix the problems. So let's first take a look at the post-development conditions on that left side of that graphic. So we see that the canopy, the trees, shrubs, and grasses that would have naturally been in place catch and slow the precipitation through an act called interception. The stormwater would then be absorbed, evaporated, or slowly trickled down the plant onto the soil surface. Undeveloped soils also typically have larger amounts of pore spaces, so they can hold larger amounts of water for percolation or just holding. This also lessens the amount of surface runoff that is occurring. Now let's compare the pre-development conditions to the post-development conditions we see on that right-hand graphic. So the stormwater is falling, and it could be unmitigatedly falling without being intercepted by trees, shrubs, or other plants, falling directly onto the soil surface. Because of these post-development soils can be highly compacted, there's larger amounts of surface runoff and less pore space, meaning there's less capacity for holding or percolating water through the soil. Now that we've thoroughly discussed the problems, let's talk about the solution. Trees! We're going to explore stormwater interception, infiltration, and transpiration, as well as the roles trees play both above and below ground in stormwater management. Trees serve many roles in our environment today, but one thing that they rarely are labeled as is stormwater managers. I'd argue, however, that that's one of their most important jobs in today's world. They're constantly working both above and below ground at catching, holding, and moving rainwater. Through an action called interception, the tree canopies, leaves, stems, and branches are holding onto precipitation as it's falling into the canopy. This rainwater can either fall through the canopy onto the forest floor in an action called throughfall. It can trickle down the stems and branches onto the forest floor in an action called stem flow, or the water may be absorbed or evaporated back into the atmosphere. It's important to remember that our trees are interacting with that precipitation first, and I'd argue that trees that are planted next to impervious surfaces have an even more important job in slowing that precipitation before it runs off onto the impervious surface. Just as I mentioned in the previous slide, tree canopies serve an important role in interception of stormwater. That's precipitation that never reaches the soil and is caught by the leaves, branches, and stems of the tree before it hits the ground. Another factor that can influence stormwater management and the amount of stormwater that's hitting the ground is the size of the canopy. A way that we can measure the size of the canopy is in LAI, or leaf area index. And that's simply just the leaf area surface of a given ground area unit. So it's the amount of leaf surface that is able to catch and hold water within a certain area of land. So one could say that higher LAI trees intercept more precipitation and are going to drastically decrease the likelihood of localized flooding. So for example, a bur oak tree, which has a very large, wide canopy with large leaves, has a larger LAI than, say, a young honey locust with small leaves and a smaller canopy would. If you take a look at that image on the left, you can see a very large honey locust tree that's lost a large amount of limbs from a high wind event that took place in Iowa this summer. So this tree lost a large potential for interception, losing almost half of its canopy during that storm event. And that's something that you consider when you have large trees is how much stormwater they could be intercepting. And later on, I'll touch on how that actually benefits your community and why you want larger trees. And so having a damaging wind event like this can be super detrimental to both your stormwater management system and your community. So from what we've learned already, we know that trees serve a lot of roles above ground in how they manage stormwater. But now let's talk about below ground. Let's talk about tree roots at work. So the first thing to understand is that the majority of tree roots are actually growing in the top 12 inches of soil. So just like you can see in this picture, a majority of the roots are actually in that first 12 inches. A lot of these roots here are actually very important to the health of the tree. Fibrous roots actually break up soil compaction, that compact soil that we often see in urban settings, and that provides more pore space, which and then means the soil can hold more water. When you let tree roots do their job, they're going to make the soils less compacted, and then you'll see less surface runoff in the long run. This will allow for natural infiltration to take place in the soil, allowing for your stormwater to have somewhere to go. They say that soil is one of the best places for stormwater to be held, and tree roots are helping make that possible. So far throughout this presentation, I've talked about stormwater management problems. I've talked about stormwater management solutions. But now let's look at some real-world examples and how street tree inventories in Iowa revealed huge stormwater infrastructure cost savings for communities there. Throughout 2019 and early 2020, JAO's urban forestry team completed city tree inventories for over 30 Iowa communities. We completed tree surveys for all trees in right-of-ways and inside parks. We collected data like size, species, and a health grading for each of the city-owned trees. For these cities with between 2,500 and 5,000 residents, each of the cities had on average around 1,260 public trees. Once we complete a city tree inventory, we take all of the data that's collected and plug it into a software called iTreeStreets. iTreeStreets is a software developed by the USDA and US Forest Service to calculate dollar value benefits for communities with trees. Using this data, we were able to understand that communities with around 1,260 public trees had on average 3,352,873 gallons of precipitation intercepted by their trees every single year. That's enough water to fill a football field up with 10 feet of water. And not only is this software able to help us calculate the amount of water that would be intercepted, it's also able to help us identify the dollar value of benefits in reduced infrastructure maintenance costs and utility costs. For a city with around 1,260 public trees, the annual benefits for city trees with stormwater is around $90,862 annually in savings. That's such an incredible value for just having 1,200 trees. So after seeing these numbers, it's been made clear to me that the more trees a community has, the more money they're going to save in maintenance and utility costs. And that wraps up our presentation. So in summary, we've discussed the ways in which urbanization and the lack of pre-development-like conditions have affected stormwater management and the issues that have existed in our environment. We've explored stormwater interception, infiltration, the need for trees, and the roles that trees play in management of stormwater. And we've revealed that the existence of street trees within a community can significantly reduce the chances of flooding and save cities thousands of dollars in maintenance. Following the airing of this presentation, there will be a time for you to ask me any questions you would like. If you don't, however, get the opportunity to ask me any questions, feel free to reach out to me by phone or email. You can also check out the JEO website for extra services that JEO provides. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.